As we continue on through First Peter, we are in First Peter chapter 4. I've entitled today's sermon, End Times Ministry. Now, whenever you hear those words, the end times, you may think of an image of a guy standing on a street corner with a sign that says, the end is near, and we've seen that. And the first thing you think of when you see that kind of an idea, oh, there's a nut, there's a fruitcake, somebody that's just, bonkers, standing out on a street corner with a sign, the end is near, and all that kind of stuff. But, it's interesting because that has been a very, very common thing throughout history, hasn't it? People who have basically said for one reason or another that the world is coming to an end, the end is here. Back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was just a plethora of groups. Many of them were what we would call fringe cult groups off of Christianity, like the Jehovah Witnesses and the Mormons and Seventh Day Adventists that were claiming that Jesus was coming back, and they would set dates. Jehovah Witnesses set them over and over again, and every time Jesus didn't come back, they had to come up with a reason why he didn't come back. Well, he came back invisibly, so that's and stuff like that. And so there's been a lot of date setting through the years, and not just in the cults, just also even in what we would consider biblical Orthodox Christianity. I remember, I was in college back in 1988 when 88 Reasons Why Jesus Was Coming Back in 1988 came out. That book. It was flying through the campus that I was in. People were passing out those little books like they were gospel tracts, that would lead people to heaven. And of course, 1988 came and went, and we're still here as far as the world's concerned. It's not a new thing. This is a book, The Day and the Hour, written by Francis Gummerlock, and it's a 350-page book, and it's just year after year after year of those that said that Jesus was coming back, and when and why, and what their rationale was. Almost every year from when Jesus ascended into heaven to now. Somebody was saying he was coming back. There's a whole book on it, The Day and the Hour. But it's not just been religious groups. Far from it. I mean, your liberal environmentalist groups are par for the course too. They've been saying, oh yes, the end is near. If we don't, go back to the Stone Age and get rid of everything that heats or gives energy, the world's gonna have horrible things happen to it. And you've got all kinds of things that have come out from all these fanciful movies the day after tomorrow, and the whole world basically becomes an ice age. And right off the Al Gore, his Inconvenient Truth that he did back in 2006, it said in 10 years, if we don't basically eliminate all the greenhouse gases, that basically the world was going to be on the brink of an absolute destruction in 10 years. And well, of course, 2016 came and went, didn't it? And I just saw this week I saw an article that said in 10 years the polar ice caps are going to melt, and if we don't do something, and they're going to be no more. So I mean, yeah. So it's not just religious people that are calling this, but there's always some group out there that's saying the end is coming. The end is coming. Well, crazies aside, the truth is the universe does have an expiration date known only to its maker. Okay, there is an expiration date. That's important for us to know. The Bible's very clear about that. The universe is just not going to go on for eternity. It is going to have an expiration date. It is going to have a day when it's called to account, and everything is dealt with. And so we call that the Judgment Day, the Parousia, the Second Coming of Christ. There's a lot of different names that we give it, the Day of the Lord. But that day is true, and that day is coming. And that's what we're going to be dealing with today in our passage. So let's go to 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another, as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so the first thing that we deal with is we get into this is Peter says right there in verse 7, the end of all things is at hand. Okay, and what he's making reference to what he just spoke of previously, right there before that in verse 5, that everybody is going to stand before the judge, the judgment day. The judgment day is coming. So he's talking about the end of the universe when everybody is going to stand before the Lord on that day, the Lord's day, judgment day, and give an account. Okay, and he says, yeah, that day's coming. That day's coming. And so because that day's coming, there's a certain attitude that he wants us to have. Now, you might say, well, okay, Peter wrote this almost, 2,000 years ago. What does it mean that the end is coming? And you got to keep in mind, all the apostles wrote this way. Their view was that the end times, okay, or the last days, was everything, that period of time between the first coming of Christ, the first advent, and the second coming of Christ, the second advent. That was the last days, or the end times. Okay, so we are living in the end times. And so we're talking about it from an eschatological point of view, as far as God's plan for this universe. And you had creation and everything that took place there, and then the flood, and then you had the different periods that you had within there. So you had the Noahic times and the Abraham times and the prophets and the time of Moses and so on and so forth. And this is from a biblical point of view. This is the end times that we're living in, and that was included even in what we would call the New Testament period. Was the end times, or the last days. In fact, if you look at First Peter, go back to 1 Peter chapter 1, and down at verse 20. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of you. It's talking about Jesus. Okay, again, he was part of God's plan before the world was even created. That salvation would come through what Christ did on the cross. But it's saying that he was made manifest in these last times. Again, from the first coming or the first advent of Christ, the second advent of Christ, the last times, the end times. But that idea is going on here. So that being said, we're going to see what Jesus had to say a little bit about. Let's go to Matthew 24. starting with verse 26. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Verse 24. I started later. I say Matthew 24 and 26. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. You know what it was. I know what it was. That's all good and stuff, and it's pertinent to what we're saying. But it's verse 36. Okay, so Matthew 24:36. I was like, okay, that's not where I was exactly going. So Matthew 24:36. But concerning that day or hour, no one knows. That's what Jesus is saying about his return. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one taken, the other left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. Therefore you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master set over his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find doing so when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will put him over all his possessions. But if the wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour he does not know, and cut him to pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, of course, we could spend all of our time on this passage. It's an incredible passage. It's well done. Tells us a lot. But for the sake of what I want us to see is, number one, nobody knows when the Lord's coming. Just that he is. And the big thing that we want to see is this difference between the blessed servant and the wicked servant. The blessed servant served faithfully, even though he didn't know when his master was going to return. The wicked servant says, oh, come on, it's been how long? It's not going to happen. Though they both claimed to serve him, one served themselves and acted wickedly, and one served him even if he didn't know that he was going to come back anytime soon or not. The difference was borne out in the fruit of their action. And so that's where we're really going to be focusing on in Peter. Let's go to back to our main passage in 1 Peter 4. And it says, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. So be self-controlled and sober-minded. Okay? We're called to be alert and mentally disciplined for the sake of our prayers, so that we can pray faithful and accurate prayers. Okay? We have to remember prayer is powerful. And yes, God is sovereign, but he works through his people. He works through his people. He evangelizes through his people, and he works through the prayers of his people. Let's go to James 5. Let me see here. James chapter 5, 16 through 20. Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power at its working. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain, and for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and earth bore its fruit. My brothers, if any one of you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. Okay, so here, this is that statement that, the prayer of the righteous avails much. And how are we righteous? We're made righteous through the blood of Christ, through his righteousness, not ours, through what he did on the cross. And it gives the example of Elijah and his powerful prayers. God was using these prayers of Elijah to be a testimony to the people in power at the time. And he could have just had Elijah announce it, but no, he worked through the prayers of Elijah, both to stop the rain and to send the rain. Okay, he worked through in the same way he wants to work through us. And notice that our prayers are powerful because of his righteousness, and that we're to use them to bless one another. See, if it talks about somebody wandering from the truth, to bring them back. So that's what we're going into next, is this idea of not only our prayers, but our actions being ministry to one another in these end times, and what we need to be aware of with that. So let's go back to our main passage, and we're back in 1 Peter 4. It says in verse 8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Okay, so again, our focus here is the importance of loving one another with genuine, sincere love. Let's look at John 13:35, the Gospel of John 13:35. And I know we've spoken about that here recently. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another, Jesus said. So the church identifies itself by its love for one another. Okay, and that's where Peter's at too when he's talking about. He says, above all, love each other earnestly. Love covers a multitude of sin. And so, you've often heard maybe somebody say something to the extent of, no matter what you do, you're still family. Maybe you'll hear a mother or a father say to their son or their daughter who has done something horrible, and they will say, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter what you've done. We're going to love you because you're our son, you're our daughter. And the same way, we Christians need to have that same kind of unconditional love for one another, because we're family for eternity. And so this is exactly what's being spoken of here, that we need to love and forgive those who have offended us and hurt us, because love and forgiveness cover offenses. So that's exactly what we're talking about. And that brings us into our next passage. It says, verse 9, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as God's stewards of God's various grace. Okay, so what we're seeing here, this idea of showing hospitality to one another, it's the idea of serving with grace. Serving with grace. One of the things that we get on with our kids is, like, when they're told to do a chore, like washing the dishes. They can go into that they're going to wash the dishes, period. They are going to wash the dishes. The attitude that they have to have during that dishwashing time is their choice. They can choose to serve happily and joyfully, and probably get our respect as their parents, or they can grump and complain, and at the same time, instead of our respect, they're going to get frustration from us. But The dishes are going to be done regardless. In the same way, as a church family, we are given the opportunity. We're all given unique gifts and talents in which to serve, and so we serve. We do. We serve. Some of us are pastors and elders, and some of us are on the church board, and some of us are on the trustee board. Some of us are in the social committee. Some of us are in some music committee. You name it. Now, we do those things, and we say we do them for the glory of God. But the question is our attitude showing that? Or are we grumbling and complaining when we're doing these things? This idea of showing hospitality and serving one another, not with grumbling, but with grace. This is what we're called to do. The faithful servant serves with grace and joy. Okay, I'm not saying we don't have a bad day, but I'm talking on the norm. We're not sitting around grumbling, well, nobody's going to pay attention to what I'm doing, and I'm doing this, and somebody else should be doing it, and why am I not getting enough help, and rah, 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 rah. Yeah, that's not hospitality, okay, with grace or joy. That's grumbling, and that's what we're not called to do that, right? It says right here that we're supposed to show hospitality to one another without grumbling. We're to serve one another without grumbling. If you don't want to do a position, then don't go in that position. But if you're going to do that position, do it as unto the Lord. Do it with joy, with grace, and so this is what we're being called to do, and we are being called to serve. It's not saying, hey, sit on the sidelines. We are all given by God certain talents, certain gifts, and we are to use them without grumbling, but out of joy. And so that's what we're getting at here, and that's what Peter's getting at. He says, whoever, verse 11, whoever speak as one who speaks the oracles of God. Whoever serves as one who serves by the strength of God, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him be glory, dominion forever and ever. Amen. So the bottom line is here, we're to do all that we do for the glory of Christ as ambassadors. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says that we are ambassadors of Christ. And Paul later goes on to say that that we're to be imitators of Christ. Ambassadors, representatives. I like the way Romans 12 puts it. Let's go there real quick. Romans 12. Starting with verse 9. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal, but fervent in the Spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to what to do, that it is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so as it depends on you, live peaceably with everyone. Okay, does this sound familiar? Very similar to what Peter's saying. And Paul's basically agreeing. He's saying that we need to be loving and serving and caring, that our love needs to be sincere for one another, and our service needs to be done for the glory of God. Okay, I'm gonna close with this passage, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. Give no offense to the Jews or the Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Again, This is the whole idea that whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. If you're teaching Sunday school, for the glory of God. If you're a trustee, for the glory of God. If you're on the social committee, for the glory of God. Music committee, for the glory of God. Whatever you do, if you're an usher, for the glory of God. Okay? If you're serving in games, for the glory of God. Whatever you do, do it all for His glory as His ambassador. And remember the difference between the wicked servant and the faithful servant? It was shown in the fruit of their work. End Times ministry. It's about loving each other with sincere love and bringing glory to God in all we do. Thank you.